Hello, hello. Welcome once again to another edition of Quoth The Raven, Lewis Bright Raven. I had to change the lamp over there for a second. Apologize for running a little bit late. Unfortunately, I had some graphics issues. They weren't loading onto my stream area to share them. So I was like, this is not good. Why are you doing this to me? Why always at the last second? But anyway, we're going to review 6 movies tonight. We're going to start with The Vampire Bat from 1933. Directed by Frank R. Strayer. Written by Edward T. Lowe Jr. Produced by Phil Goldstone and Larry Darmore. Starring Lionel Atwill, Fay Wray of King Kong fame, Melvin Douglas, Dwight Fry, and Maude Ebern. It's distributed by Majestic Pictures, released January 10th, 1983, has a running time of 63 minutes. It's a real short film. And what it's about is the villagers of Kleinschloss start dying off of blood loss. And the town fathers suspect that there's a resurgence of vampirism in the area, but police inspector Carl Breitschneider remains skeptical. Scientist Dr. Otto von Niemann, who cares for the victims, visits a patient who was attacked by a bat, Martha Mueller. Out of appreciation for her kindness, Martha is visited by a mentally challenged man named Herman Glebe, who he claims he likes bats because they are soft like cat and nice. Man named Herman Glebe. Sorry about that. I went to go to the next screen and went to my other one. Anyway, on the doctor's journey home, he meets Kringen, one of the townsfolk, who claims to have been attacked by the vampire in the form of bat, but withheld his story from the town in order not to spread fear. Dr. von Niemann encourages Kringen to tell the townfolk of his story. Kringen becomes suspicious that Glebe may be the vampire due to his obsession with bats. Glebe lives with the bats and collects them off the street. Now Dr. von Niemann returns to his home, and which also happens to house Breitschneider's love interest, Ruth Burton, her hypochondriac aunt Gussie Shopman, and servants Emil Borst and Georgiana. Fear of the vampire and suspicion of Glebe quickly spread around the town, and people start fearing him. Then Miss Mueller is killed later that evening. The two doctors, Van Niemann and another doctor, Dr. Hopp, analyze the body and conclude that the death is the same as all the previous death. Blood loss with 2 punctures in the neck caused by needle-sharp teeth. Glebe enters the examination, and upon seeing the dead body, runs away screaming. Next morning, Glebe enters von Niemann's garden, where von Niemann, Breitschneider, and Burton are all discussing vampires inside the house. The town fathers have entered the house, and they announce that Kringen is dead and that Glebe is missing. An angry mob then hunts down Glebe and chases him through the countryside and into a cave, where he falls to his death. That night, Dr. von Niemann is seen telepathically controlling Emil Borst as he picks up the sleeping Georgiana and takes her down to Dr. von Niemann's laboratory, where a strange organism is seen, and they drain the blood from her neck. In other words, von Niemann is the criminal here, not Glebe. There was no vampire. It's all science. Schnappman then discovers Georgiana's body in her bed later on. Von Niemann and Breitschneider investigate and find Ms. Mueller's crucifix, which Glebe had handled right the night before von Niemann had visited her. Breitschneider is becoming more and more convinced of the presence of vampires in the village, as there are no other seemingly plausible explanations for the deaths that can be found. Of course, he doesn't know that von Niemann is the one that's doing this. As Glebe was then seen in the garden that morning, they conclude that he must be guilty. Of course, von Niemann is just playing Breitschneider, but then he hears about Glebe's death, and then Breitschneider's conviction is erased. He returns to the scene. He tries to figure things out. Von Niemann tells Bridge Schneider to just go home and take some sleeping pills, think about it later. But he gives Bridge Schneider poison instead, intent on draining his blood after he's out or killed from the poison. Bertine discovers Dr. Von Niemann telepathically controlling Borst, who is at Bridge Schneider's house. It is revealed that Dr. Von Niemann is then revealed that he's created this artificial life form and is using the blood of others to feed it. He ties Burton up and gags her in his lab. Borst supposedly enters with Bridge Schneider's body on a trolley, and then Von Niemann walks over to Borst, who is revealed to be Bridge Schneider, who did not take the pills that he was given, in the costume, with the real Borst on the trolley. Bridge Schneider then pulls a gun on Von Niemann, and then tries to walk over to untie Burton. Not a good idea. Should arrest Niemann first, but they get in a fight. Bridge Schneider drops the gun. Then Emil Borst picks up the gun and shoots Von Niemann before shooting himself, and that's the end, more or less. What did I think? The main reason I went ahead and watched this was because I could do so online for free, and I had Fay Wray in the not Fay Wray, but Fay Wray in the film. I thought might be okay. Sadly, her role isn't that large, and the story isn't very good. But this is what we called in that era a quickie film. Wray and Lionel Atwell had been successful in the film Dr. X the previous year, which is a classic, and had already wrapped up their work filming Mystery of the Wax Museum for Warner Brothers at the time. This was a large-scale release and would have had a lengthy post-production process. Seeing a chance to exploit all the advanced press, Poverty Row Studio Majestic Pictures contracted Wray and Atwell for their own quickie horror film and rushed The Vampire Bat into production and released it in January of 1933. They had lower overheads than the larger studios, which were struggling at the time during the Great Depression. Part of the reason that The Vampire Bat looked almost as good as the Universal Pictures, however, was because Majestic leased James Whale's cast-offs, like the German Village backlot sets that were left over from Frankenstein in 1931, and the interior sets from his film The Old Dark House in 1932. Plus, there were some location shoots at Bronson Caves. That was all part of that they could rent cheaply, completing the illusion that this was a film from a larger studio. They then hired actor Dwight Fry to populate scenes with Wray and Atwell to try to make it look even more upscale. They got a stock musical theme from Charles Dunworth to accompany the opening credits. Of course, this film has nothing to do with vampires per se, and the company more or less pulls a ruse in story and the scheduling. The Vampire Bat ruse worked well, however, because they were able to rush the film into theaters less than a month before Warner's release of the Mystery of the Wax Museum and take advantage of the fact that they had a film with Atwell and Wray off the success of Dr. X. Now, to me, the story was flaky, and I was kind of disappointed, but at the same time, this is 1933. It's not like movie scripts were particularly well written or thought out at the time, especially not from a low-budget studio from Majestic, so I guess you just kind of deal with it for what it is. The movie was not rated at that time. Today, I guess it would probably be a PG film. Recommended for ages 12 and up. I gave it 2.5 stars. The next film is Daughter of Dracula, 1972. This is a French film written and directed by Jesus Franco, but it's Jess Franco in terms of what they put on the credits. It stars Carmen Yazalde as Brett Nichols, Ann Liebert, Alberto Dabez, Howard Vernon, Daniel White, and Jesus Franco or Jess Franco. The production companies were Interfilm, and it was released on December 14th of 1972. It has an hour and 27-minute runtime. It was not rated in the French market. It would have definitely been an R, maybe even an X in the USA in 1972. What's about? Louisa visits her dying mother at Karlstein Castle. Before she dies, she tells Louisa that the Karlsteins are actually a family of vampires, and that her ancestor, the original Count Karlstein, lies buried in the crypt. Soon, Louisa is bitten by Count Karlstein, aka Dracula, portrayed by Howard Vernon. And before long, more bodies begin to pile up, and it's basically just a weird mess of a film. What do I think about this? Well, Jess, or Jesus Franco, is a very questionable, that's a good word, writer and director. He's great at atmosphere, but he's terrible at plot, pacing, and being able to decide just what the heck kind of film this was supposed to be. He keeps shifting between different kinds of films, horror, erotica, giallo. I don't know if you know what that is, but look it up if you don't. And it basically ends up being a barely functional cluster of all three genres. This is not a movie I can really recommend because there is no plot. There are actual vampire porn movies that have more plot than this film. It's just a confusing mess. And the reason I watched this film was because I thought it was going to be more like a Hammer version of the 1936 film Dracula's Daughter, which I didn't have access to. So I just thought it was going to be that, but more modern and maybe akin to something like 1980s Cat People that I reviewed last week. Sadly, I was sorely disappointed, and I didn't even finish this film. I quit about maybe 45, 50 minutes through because I had other films to view and review, and I was not impressed with this at all. Rating 1.5 stars. Here we go. Horror of Dracula is the next film from 1958. It is directed by Terence Fisher, screenplay by Jimmy Sangster, based on the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker, produced by Anthony Hines. Stars Peter Cushing, Michael Gow, Melissa Studling, and Christopher Lee. This is Christopher Lee's first appearance as Dracula. Production company is Hammer Film Productions, distributed by Rank Film Distributors in the UK and Universal internationally, including the US. The genre is horror suspense. Release date was May 7th in 1958, May 21st in 58 in London. So there you go. What is it about? Well, in 1885, Jonathan Harker arrives at the castle of Count Dracula near the village of Klausenburg to take up his post as librarian at the castle. Once inside, he is startled by a young woman who claims that she's being held prisoner and begs for his help. She flees as Dracula arrives and greets Harker and guides him to his room. Alone, Jonathan writes in his diary, and his true intentions are revealed. He is a vampire hunter. He knows Dracula is a vampire. He's come to destroy him. Sometime later, Harker again is confronted by the desperate woman. Of course, she is revealed to be a vampire and bites his neck. Dracula arrives and pulls her away as Harker passes out. When he awakens in his room in the daylight, Harker discovers the bite marks on his neck. He realizes he's doomed. He writes a final entry in his journal and then hides his book outside the castle. Okay. He descends into a crypt where he finds Dracula and the vampire woman resting in their coffins. He then stakes the female, and she withers to old age and dies. But when Harker returns to Dracula's coffin, he finds it empty. Dracula, of course, was awakened by the other one's death. He closes the door to the crypt, trapping Harker inside with him. Cut to Dr. Van Helsing arriving in Klausenburg a few days later, looking for Harker. An innkeeper's daughter gives him Harker's journal because somehow somebody figured out where to look for the journal and got it to her. And they don't really explain that. One of the little not so great plot elements there. But anyway, when Harker arrives at Dracula's castle, he finds it deserted, though he does come across the portrait that Harker had of his fiancée, Lucy Holmwood, with the photos now gone. Of course, Lucy Holmwood is not the same as the book, but we'll get into that in a minute. In the crypt, Van Helsing finds Harker's body in Dracula's coffin, transformed into a vampire. Van Helsing takes Harker before leaving town for the town of Karlstadt, where he delivers the veiled news of Harker's death to Arthur Holmwood and his wife Mina, who are brother and sister-in-law of Lucy Homewood, who has suddenly turned ill. When night falls, Lucy opens the doors to her terrace and lays bare her neck. Already it bears the mark of a vampire bite, and soon Dracula arrives and bites her again. Mina then seeks out Van Helsing's aid in treating Lucy's ailment because the regular doctor says there's nothing that doesn't make any sense, but we can't do much else. And Van Helsing realizes that it is what it is, vampire bite. Gives orders to them to, put garlic bouquets and stuff around the room, make sure he can't get in anymore. But Lucy begs the maid Gerda to remove his prescribed garlic bouquets, and of course she does, and Dracula arrives and kills her, and she is found the next day. Van Helsing then turns over Harker's journal to Arthur to explain everything to him. 3 days after Lucy is interred, an undead Lucy lures Gerda's daughter Tanya to the graveyard, where Arthur has found Lucy's tomb empty. Van Helsing appears and wards Lucy off with a cross. And then he explains to Arthur that Lucy was targeted to replace the woman that Harker killed. Van Helsing suggests using the now vampiric Lucy to direct them to Dracula, but Arthur refuses. He just wants her to be put out of misery, so Van Helsing stakes her in her coffin. Arthur takes final look at Lucy's body and sees her at peace. Then Van Helsing and Arthur travel to the border, crossing at Ingolstadt to track down Dracula's coffin and how it got out of past all the inspections and stuff. Meanwhile, Mina is called away from her home by a messenger telling her to go to the address of an undertaker in Karlstadt, where, of course, Dracula is waiting for her, and then takes her. Although we do not see that. It's implied. Mm-hmm. The next day, Arthur and Van Helsing visit the undertaker office, but then they find that Dracula's coffin has gone missing. Later, Arthur tries to give Mina a cross to wear, but she really doesn't want it, and he puts it in her hand and it burns her, which reveals that she is turning into a vampire herself and that she has been subjugated by Dracula. During the night, Dracula appears in the house and bites her again. Arthur agrees to give her a blood transfusion administered by Van Helsing. When Arthur asks Gerda to fetch some wine, she tells him that Mina had forbidden her to go down to the cellar. Upon hearing this, Van Helsing realizes where Dracula is, and he bolts downstairs to find Dracula's coffin, but it is empty. Dracula has escaped into the night with Mina, intent on making her his new vampire bride. A chase ensues by coach, horse and buggy, as Dracula rushes to return to his castle before dawn, and he attempts to bury Mina alive outside the crypt, but is stopped by the arrival of Van Helsing and Arthur. Pursuing Dracula inside the castle, Van Helsing struggles with the vampire before eventually tearing down the curtains to let in the sunlight. Van Helsing also forms a cross using 2 candlesticks, and Dracula crumbles to dust as Van Helsing looks on. Mina then recovers from her affliction, since Dracula would have been her mentor. He's gone. It passes away from her, and the scar-shaped scarf fades from her hand, while Dracula's ashes blow away in the morning breeze, leaving only his clothes and ring behind. What did I think of this? Well, like I said, this is the first time that Christopher Lee portrayed Count Dracula. This is a sort of weird adaptation with a lot of changes from Bram Stoker's original story. Harker knowing Dracula is a vampire and hunting him, and then being foolish enough to think that the bride is anything, the woman that's asking him for help is anything but a threat, and gets bitten himself. That was kind of iffy. Changing Harker's fiance from Nina to Lucy, and changing the last name, the whole connection of the bringing Arthur in and changing the last names and everything was kind of weird. Having Mina already married to him, it's just kind of weird. That they're in Germany and Romania the entire time. They never go to London. So in some ways it makes some sense. It makes more sense than the book, but in a lot of ways it's kind of head scratching because it's just like, why did they make these changes? But it is what it is. It doesn't hurt the story, so it's fine. But Peter Cushing and Van Helsing is what really carries the film. Christopher Lee isn't bad in this, but he's not really given all that much to do. The end fight scene between Van Helsing and Dracula is silly. But this is 1958 after all, and Hammer wasn't really being loyal to the novel, so I guess it works. It's not rated. If it were rated today, it would probably be rated a PG film, or maybe a PG-13. There's not any blood to speak of. There's not any excessive sexuality or anything going on in this one, so it is what it is. I would recommend it for ages 13 up, nevertheless, and I'd give it 3.5 stars. The next film is The Satanic Rites of Dracula. This is directed by Alan Gibson, written by Don Houghton, and produced by Ricky Skaggs, or Roy Skaggs, pardon me. I was confusing that with Ricky Skaggs, the musician. Sorry about that. It's Roy Skaggs. It stars Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Michael Coles, William Franklin, Freddie Jones, and Joanna Lumley. Production company Hammer Films, distributed by Columbia Warner Distributors, and it was originally released in November of 1973 in West Germany, January of 1974 in the UK and the US, and later still internationally. The genre is horror suspense, and it has a running time of 1 hour and 27 minutes. I don't have a lot of description for this one because I didn't have time, but basically what it's about is a Scotland Yard official teams up with the aged Professor Van Helsing to stop a satanic cult who worship Dracula from taking over the world. A Secret Service agent escapes the cult and passes on the information that gets given to the Scotland Yard official. The Scotland Yard official and his daughter or wife, and then Van Helsing and his daughter go to this castle where they think things are, and action ensues. Basically. What I thought was this was a good final storyline for Cushing and Lee. This was the final film of Lee doing the character of Dracula. It is modernized with a sort of espionage flair. It's rated R. I recommend it for ages 14 and up today. I give it 3.5 stars. Mostly because it's on par, a little bit better than Horror of Dracula for the given the time difference. But the difference, I think, in a way, and they played this up a little bit at the end of the film. Cushing, hold on a second. There we go. Cushing defeats Dracula again, and this time, instead of when he turns to ashes, in the 58 film, we notice that his ring is left on the floor. And this time, Cushing takes the ring in 72 film. And I think, or 73 film rather, and I think that there was a symbolic and meaning in that maybe the ring was a form of immortality. Even though you killed him, you could always resurrect him, and then Cushing's going to destroy the ring or something. But they didn't do. I don't know if they did any more Hammer films with that later with Cushing or not. I just know that this was Lee's last film. So, but it was interesting to see the first and the last films. And Lee has much more to do with this film. He's more. Not only is he more comfortable in the role, but he's more dynamic, I guess you could say. Whereas in the first film, it just wasn't. Part of it was a script, and part of it was stuff going on. They were trying to do it, and they were still doing kind of what was done with the original Universal film with Lugosi, but not quite working out in that 58 film the same. this is a much better written film in that respect, I think. Okay. We go next to The Vampire Happening, 1971, directed by Freddie Francis. Writers are August Rieger for the screenplay and Karl-Heinz Hummel for the story. Produced by Pierre A. Camanici. Stars Pia Degermark, Thomas Hunter, Ivor Murillo, Ingrid Van Bergen, Joachim Kemmer, Oscar Regrostek, Freddie Main. I think Freddie Main's supposed to be one playing as Count Dracula. Pardon me. Olivia Bauer, Daria DeMar, Kay Williams, Michael Janisch, Tori Wagner, and Raoul Retzer. It is a horror comedy parody type film. It was released in Germany in June 4th, 1971. This is kind of a weird film. You got to watch it in with the captions. It's a runtime of 102 minutes. What it's about, basically an American actress inherits a castle in Transylvania. What she doesn't know is that her ancestor, the Baroness Catali, was in actuality a vampire countess, and she emerges, of course, that now emerges from her tomb to ravage a nearby village and Catholic seminary. Basically, the Italian producer, Pierre Camanici, was looking for a film for his wife, Pia Degermark, whose previous film, Elvira Madigan, from 1967, was a critical and financial success. He set up an international production for her in West Germany, directed by the British director Freddie Francis, and written by the writers, working partly on the short story by Théophile Gautier, Le Mort Amoureuse, which is The Dead Woman in Love in English. Unfortunately, the producer and the screenwriters didn't take it seriously enough, and it's just kind of a mind-numbingly silly, funny but not funny. It's a decent palate cleanser between real horror movies. Let's put it that way. It's enough that you can. It's one of these kind of films that you could watch on Mystery Science Theater 3000 and enjoy. But just to watch it alone, I don't think it's all that great. But recommended for ages 16 and up, 2 out of 5 stars. And lastly, we have Vampire Circus from 1972. Directed by Robert Young, screenplay by Judson Kinberg, story by George Brax and Wilbur Stark, produced by Wilbur Stark and Michael Carreras. It stars Adrienne Corey, Anthony Higgins, John Mulder Brown, Lynn Frederick, Lala Ward, and Robin Sachs. Production, Hammer Films. Distributed by Rank Film Distributors in the UK and 20th Century Fox in the US. It was released April 30th, 72 in the UK, and October 11th, 72 in the US. It also has a running time of 1 hour, 27 minutes. That's actually a pretty common thing for Hammer Films, is 1 hour and 27 minutes. It's like they edit for that specific time. I've noticed that. It's kind of interesting. What it's about. One evening near the small Serbian village of Stettel, early in the 19th century, schoolmaster Albert Mueller witnesses his wife Anna taking a little girl, Jenny Schilt, into the castle of Count Mitterhaus, a reclusive nobleman rumored to be a vampire responsible for the disappearances of other children. These rumors prove true as Anna, who has become Mitterhaus's willing acolyte and mistress, gives Jenny to him to be drained of her blood. Men from the village, directed by Mueller, and including Jenny's father, Mr. Schilt, and the Burgermeister, invade the castle and attack the Count. After the vampire kills several of them, however, Mueller succeeds in driving a wooden stake through his heart. With his dying breath, Mitterhouse curses the villagers, vowing that their children will die to give him back his life. The angry villagers force Anna to run a gauntlet, but when her husband intervenes, she runs back into the castle, where the briefly revived Count tells her to find his cousin Emil at the Circus of Night. After laying his body in the crypt, she escapes through a tunnel as the villagers blow up the castle. 15 years later, Stettel is being ravaged by a plague and blockaded by authorities of neighboring towns, with men ready to shoot any villager who tries to leave. The citizens fear that the pestilence may be due to the Count's curse, though the new physician, Dr. Kirsch, dismisses vampires as just a myth. A traveling circus, calling itself the Circus of Night, then arrives at the village, directed by a dwarf and an alluring gypsy woman who are equivocal about how they got past the blockade. The villagers, appreciative of the distraction from their troubles, do not much question the matter. No one in the village suspects that one of the circus artists, Emil, is actually Count Mitterhouse's cousin and a vampire, as are the twin acrobats Heinrich and Helga. Emil and a gypsy woman go to the ruins of the castle, where in the crypt they find the Count's staked body still preserved, and they restate his curse that all who killed him and their children must die. While his son Anton distracts the armed men at the blockade, Dr. Hirsch gets past them to appeal for help from the capital. At the Circus of Night, however, the villagers are amazed and delighted by the entertainment. Despite his wife's concerns over their wayward daughter Rosa and her attraction to the handsome Emil, the Burgermeister takes her to the circus and, at the gypsy woman's invitation, visits the Hall of Mirrors, where he sees, in one called the Mirror of Life, a vision of a revived Count Mitterhouse, which causes him to collapse. Frightened by this event, Schlitt tries to flee with his family from the blockade village with the circus dwarf Michael as their guide, only to be abandoned by him in the forest and then mauled to death by Emil, whose shape-shifting form is a Black Panther, and he kills him as the Panther. Mueller's daughter Dora, whom he sent away earlier for protection, has slipped past the blockade again and is returning to the village to reunite her with her father and her beloved Anton when she discovers the Schilt's dismembered bodies, and this arouses suspicions about the animals at the circus. That evening, John and Gustav Hauser, two village boys whose father helped instigate the killing of Mitterhouse, are invited by the gypsy woman to enter the Hall of Mirrors, and they are magically drawn by Heinrich and Helga to the Count's crypt, where they are killed and drained. After the boys' bodies are found near the castle, their grieving father and the sick Burgermeister begin to shoot circus animals, thinking that this is what's going on. After an encounter with Emil, however, the Burgermeister dies of heart failure, and his daughter leaves with the vampire. The vampire then kills and drains her in the crypt. Dora and Anton are lured then by the twins, Heinrich and Helga, to the Hall of Mirrors, where they try to whisk Dora through the Mirror of Life, but the cross that she is wearing saves her and kicks her back out, more or less. The vampires enter the schoolhouse where Dora and Anton have taken refuge. Emil in panther form kills the boarding students, diverting Anton, while a gypsy woman, who is revealed to be Anna Mueller and the twins' mother, tears the cross off of Dora's neck, enabling Heinrich and Helga to attack her. Dora, however, escapes through the school chapel, where the twins get overwhelmed by a giant crucifix, which she topples upon them, destroying them. Nevertheless, with the help of the surface strongman, Emil and Anna succeed in having Dora and her guardian, Hauser's wife Gerda, kidnapped and then taken back to the crypt at Castle Mitterhouse, where they intend to use her blood, just like they have for the previous child victims, as a part of a ritual to restore the Count Mitterhouse back to life. Dr. Kirsch then returns from the capital with an imperial escort and medicines for the plague. He also brings news of vampire killings in other villages, all of them visited by the Circus of Night. The men attack the circus and set fire to it, killing the strong man when he tries to stop them. As Hauser starts to burn down the Hall of Mirrors, he sees in the Mirror of Life a vision of Emil and Anna bleeding Goethe over the Count's body. This horrifying sight distracts him long enough to be burned fatally by the fire, but he lives long enough to alert Anton and the others to Dora's plight. Back in the castle crypt, the suddenly remorseful Anna is killed when she attempts to save Dora from a mill. Anton, finding his way through the tunnel into the crypt despite a deadly ambush by Michael, the dwarf, attempts to rescue Dora, but he is halted by a mill. Just then, Mueller, Dr. Kirsch, and a soldier break into the crypt and battle Emil, who kills or disables all of his attackers, but Mueller then pierces him with a stake. With the stake that came from the couch chest just as he is dying from Emil's bite. Revived by the stake's removal, however, the Count rises from the sarcophagus and advances on Dora and Anton. Anton uses Mueller's crossbow as a makeshift cross, repelling the Count just long enough for him to jam the vampire's neck between the weapon's bow and stock and then pulling the trigger, which somehow decapitates the Count. It's kind of a weird description, but it is what happens. As Dr. Kirsch leads Dora and Anton from the tomb, he and the villagers set the ruins afire with torches, which ends the curse. But Dora and Anton see a bat fly out of the tomb into the night, and they are left uncertain as to whether the nightmare is truly over. And that's how it ends. It's much better than I thought it was going to be. Keep in mind what I've been watching alongside with this film. No, and how disappointing some of these films have been. The story is somewhat kinky. The blockade is far too easy for people to slip through, and it makes you wonder why anybody even bothered. And there's a few other things that I thought didn't make sense. The crossbow decapitation being one of them. The giant crucifix was kind of a weird thing, but okay. So the performances are a little bit campy at times, but it's at least in a similar level of caliber of quality to other Hammer films of this era. And that's pretty respectable in and of itself. It's rated PG. I recommend it for ages 12 and up, and I give it 3 stars. And that pretty much concludes our reviews of films and vampires tonight. I know a lot of guys were probably expecting the traditional stuff like Lost Boys or Bela Lugosi's Dracula. Talked about them last year. So I was trying to find some different stuff to talk about. And so, hit and miss, I suppose, this week, but I tried. So if you liked this episode, hold on a second. There we go. Remind you that tomorrow, first, I want to remind you, tomorrow, 1:30 p.m., we're reviewing Graveyard Wars by A.J. Lieberman and Andrew Sebastian Kwan. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., we'll be doing our live draw, Halloween live draw, Halloween Monster Mash. And then Sunday, tomorrow night at 8 p.m., Horror Movie Night Part 3. More horror movie discussion with guest host John Norris. He'll be joining me, and we'll be discussing The Leopard Man, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Target's Dementia 13, The Vanishing Corpse, and Revolt of the Zombies. If you enjoyed this particular episode, or you think others might, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. If this thing ever will show it to you, there you go. And support the channel, if you would, please. As always, I thank you for watching and for your support. If you want to reach out to me on social media, I'm at Facebook at Lewis.BrightRaven, at Twitter at LewisBrightRaven2. You can see my artwork at deviantart.com/BrightRaven. You've been watching Quoth The Raven, Lewis Bright-Raven, exclusively on YouTube. If you have questions, comments, want to suggest topics for future episodes, maybe you want to commission some artwork, Quoth The Raven LBR72@gmail.com is the address to reach me at. If I don't get back to you within 24 to 48 hours, try LewisBrightRaven@yahoo.com. That's all for now. Have a good evening. We will see you tomorrow afternoon with the last Booktober show, Graveyard Wars. Until then, have a good night. See you next time.